We're joined by the political scientist and psephologist, Professor Sir John Curtice. Professor, thank you very much indeed for being with us. Let's talk about the margin of victory here in Rutherglen and Hamilton West. A 20% swing to Labour, a massive result on the night for Labour. What does that mean?
Well, it certainly underlines the message of opinion polls north of the border that the SNP face a significant challenge from the Labour Party for the Scotland's representation at Westminster. Just to give you some idea of the scale of Labour's success, so they've got nearly 59% of the vote. That is almost as high as the party achieved in this constituency back in 2010. Which is the last time that the Labour Party did well in Scotland, at a time when they were still able to get 40 or so of Scotland's seats. And certainly if this kind of swing were to be repeated in the general election, indeed, the Labour Party could look forward to picking up 40 seats. Now, we do have to bear in mind by-elections do often see an exaggerated swing to the opposition when the government's unpopular. And here we're talking about a situation where both the UK government, certainly, and the SNP Scottish government, certainly more recently, are unpopular. So the circumstances for a particularly strong swing were there. But even if one wants to say, well, Labour wouldn't necessarily do quite this well in the general election, it is now perfectly clear that the SNP face a challenge for their Westminster representation from Labour, and that Humza Yousaf still yet to convince people that he can necessarily be an effective First Minister, not anything like as popular as his predecessor, does now face a very substantial challenge to demonstrate his ability to get his party out of what threatens to be quite a substantial mess.
And John, just in terms of this, we talked about the swing being 20.4% across the country. If you were to extrapolate that, my understanding is Labour needs something like a 13% swing to make sure they have a majority of one. That was last time, I believe, under Blair. So in terms, as you rightly say, of course, by-elections are very difficult to predict because, of course, lots of local factors coming into play. Of course, Scotland comes into play here as well. Just in terms of the result this morning, Sir Keir Starmer will be very happy, clearly. The Conservatives, I should think, would be fairly concerned by what is going on.
Yes, undoubtedly, because if indeed the Labour Party can pick up a significant number of seats in Scotland, then it doesn't make much difference to the Conservatives' chances of winning the next election because they've got very little north of the border. But what it does do is it increases Labour's chances of getting an overall majority, and that 13% figure you quoted would certainly come down by as much as 5-6 points if Labour were indeed picking up 40 seats in Scotland. I think the nearest analogy I can give you, David, about what this might mean, because obviously politics in Scotland is different. We're talking about a swing from the SNP rather than from the Conservatives, but that the 24-point increase in Labour's own share of the vote is even bigger than the 21-point increase it registered in Selby and Ainsty, which itself was a very remarkable win in a by-election back in July. And we've now got two by-elections, which suggest the Labour Party is very, very firmly able to do extremely well, certainly in the context of by-election. And perhaps, one historical precedent just to note, the last time the Labour Party won a seat in a parliamentary by-election in Scotland, you have to go all the way back to 1964. What happened thereafter? Labour won the subsequent general election, albeit only very narrowly.
Certainly going to buoy Labour heading into their conference next week, John. But can I ask you about turnout? 37% in this by-election. What does that say about the kind of level of disillusionment with politics?
Well, the truth is, I don't think you can put too much into it. The truth is, turnout in by-elections does not tend to be that high. I think it's probably a little bit lower than we expected, given how intensively and for long the by-election had been fought, because certainly the recent by-elections in England had got turnouts a little over 40%. But, at the end of the day, voters do not, for the most part, engage in parliamentary by-elections. And there's nothing particularly striking about this. It's actually slightly higher than the last Scottish parliamentary by-election in Airdrie a couple of years ago, when the turnout was as low as 34%.
Fascinating stuff. Professor Sir John Curtice, thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome.